"Move, old woman," her son said, stepping over the groceries she dropped. She didn't argue. She let him walk right into her house like he owned it. But the next time he tried that key, the lock didn't turn. He called the police. She called her lawyer. "He's my son," she told the officers. "But this is my house." And that was the moment he realized Mom wasn't helpless anymore. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The paper bag split before she even made it to the porch. Cans rolled across the front walk, cream of mushroom soup, tomato paste, and a rogue box of pasta skittering toward the hedges. Eleanor Parsons exhaled through gritted teeth, adjusting the remaining weight on her forearms. The sun was hot against the back of her neck, and the August humidity clung to her like a second skin. She hadn't expected the sale on frozen chicken thighs to be that good, but here she was, stubborn as ever, loading everything into her own trunk and now limping it across her driveway like a mule who didn't know when to stop. A car engine rumbled behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. The dull scrape of tires on concrete told her exactly who it was. David. His SUV slid into the driveway like it owned the place. He didn't even park straight. The driver's side door popped open. "Should have planned better, old woman," he muttered as he strode past her, button-down shirt untucked, phone already in his hand, keys jingling in his pocket. He didn't even glance at the soup can resting against his foot. The screen door squealed as he entered the house. Eleanor stood still for a moment, the sting in her arms growing sharper by the second. The untouched grocery bags weighed more now, not just with food, but something colder, heavier. From across the street, Rachel Miller lowered her sunglasses. Eleanor caught the look even from this distance. Rachel's lips pressed tight, her chin lifting just an inch. There'd be words later. Probably bourbon, too. "I've got it," Eleanor murmured to no one, bending slowly to retrieve the cans. Her knees protested. One bag's plastic handle had carved a red line into her palm. The eggs were lopsided but uncracked. Small mercies. She shuffled up the porch steps with a deliberate slowness, her breath coming in shallow pulls. She'd once carried her son on her back through a snowstorm in Missouri when he was 5, and feverish. That boy had clung to her neck like her life was the only thing keeping him safe. Now she was just a woman in her 70s, lugging groceries alone while he played stock market tycoon in her living room, feet probably already up on the ottoman. Inside, the air conditioning was cool, almost jarringly so. Eleanor set the bags down on the counter with a soft grunt, wiped the sweat from her brow, and turned to close the front door behind her. She didn't slam it, but she wanted to. The living room TV was on, sports highlights. David scrolled his phone without looking up. "You gonna make lunch, or?" Eleanor stared at him for a long second. Something behind her ribs itched to break loose. Instead, she picked up the shattered remains of her paper bag, smoothed it flat, and placed it gently in the recycling bin. Her hands trembled slightly as she unpacked. Milk, produce, a jar of pickles she didn't remember grabbing. She heard the screen door creak again. "Hey, Elle," came Rachel's voice, casual as a loaded gun. "Need a hand?" Eleanor turned. Her friend stood just outside the porch rail, sunglasses back on, arms crossed. Watching. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, but her voice cracked a little. Not with pain. Not exactly. Rachel didn't move, didn't blink. "I saw what I saw." David's voice piped up from the living room. "Don't mind the watchdog, Mom. You're not helpless. You said so yourself." Eleanor's fingers tightened around a can of peas. She set it down before it could become a projectile. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You want me to come in?" Eleanor hesitated, then gave a small shake of her head. "Later." Rachel gave the barest nod, then walked back toward her porch. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like she was counting them. Eleanor turned back to the kitchen and looked at the remaining bags. 2 left, still full, still hers to deal with. She carried them inside without asking for help. As she set them on the counter, her heart thudded heavily in her chest, not from exertion, from something deeper, louder, like a drumbeat in her ears that had just begun to play. And as she opened her cabinet, reaching for a familiar blue pen and a forgotten envelope labeled "spare keys," A single thought cut through her exhaustion like a blade. He thinks this house still belongs to him. The drawer caught on something. Eleanor yanked a little harder, and it gave way with a grunt, sending a cloud of ancient receipts and paper clips sliding to the back. She dug through the mess with one hand, pushing aside faded birthday cards and expired coupons until her fingers brushed metal. A ring of keys clinked against the wood. She lifted them out slowly, like pulling bones from a grave. 4 house keys, 2 labeled, 2 notes. She stared at them. Her handwriting, small, slanted, fading, still marked the plastic tabs. Garage, shed. The other 2 were identical, plain, dull silver, unlabeled. One of those was David's. A slow breath escaped her lips. She set the ring down on the counter, her hand resting on top of it like it might try to escape. In the quiet kitchen, the sound of the TV buzzed faintly from the next room. She could hear the creak of the recliner. David had leaned back, probably with a soda he hadn't paid for. He still had access. Still had a key. Still treated the place like his birthright. Eleanor blinked hard and picked up her phone. The number was scribbled on a business card Rachel had given her months ago, tucked in the front of her checkbook. Kyle Jensen, locks and keys, local, honest, fast. There was a little doodle of a smiling padlock in the corner. She tapped the number. It rang twice. Jensen Locks, a voice answered. Warm, brisk, no nonsense. Yes, hello. Eleanor cleared her throat, startled by the rasp in her own voice. I was referred by Rachel Miller. I need the locks changed on my house. Of course, Kyle said. No hesitation. We've done a few for her block. Is this Eleanor? Yes. She looked again at the keys. I have a situation. My son has a copy, and I'd like him not to. A pause. Not long enough to be rude, just enough to understand. Say no more, I can be there first thing in the morning. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a knot untangling. You're sure? I've got a 9 a.m. opening. I'll bring everything I need. You don't have to lift a finger. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Kyle's fine. See you tomorrow, Miss Parsons. She ended the call and stared at her phone for a moment, the screen glowing faintly in the late afternoon light. The silence afterward was different. Not awkward, not tense, just quiet. The front door creaked open. Rachel stepped in like she'd been granted divine clearance. No knocking, just certainty. I brought lemonade, she said, holding up a sweating pitcher and 2 glasses. We're celebrating. Eleanor gave a small smile. Celebrating what? Rachel set the pitcher on the counter and pulled out a chair. That you're done being polite to people who treat you like a couch cushion. Eleanor arched a brow. That's a very specific metaphor. Rachel poured 2 glasses. Yeah, well, you don't realize someone's sitting on you until you can't breathe. Eleanor took the lemonade and sat. The cold glass felt grounding. I called the locksmith, she said. Rachel clinked her glass gently against Eleanor's. Damn right you did. He's coming tomorrow morning, first thing. Good, I'll be here. Eleanor hesitated. You don't have to. Rachel waved a hand. Moral support, witness, emotional bouncer. Call it what you want, but I'm not letting you face that alone, not with that smug brat 2 rooms over. Eleanor chuckled, despite herself. The laugh surprised her. It felt unfamiliar, sharp-edged and a little reckless. She reached across the table and slid the unlabeled keys into her palm, closed her fingers around them. Let him try using this key, she murmured. Rachel leaned back and sipped her lemonade. Let's just say I'm looking forward to the sound it doesn't make. Outside, cicadas buzzed in the fading heat. Inside, the kitchen was calm, purposeful. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt it again. That quiet hum of something returning. Not youth, not naivety, power. But the calm didn't last long. From the living room came the thud of David's feet hitting the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of the fridge door swinging open. Where the hell's the lemonade? Rachel didn't move. Eleanor stood up slowly, walked to the fridge, and opened it with a calm smile. Then shut it again. Must have forgotten to buy any, she called back. She turned to Rachel. Their eyes met. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Eleanor woke early. Too early for someone her age, if you asked her doctor, but she didn't mind. The air before sunrise held something clean in it, something untouched. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping weak coffee and staring at her phone as it buzzed quietly against the wood. One new message, Sharon. She didn't open it, didn't need to. The preview said enough. David told me everything. We're just trying to help, Elle. Eleanor tapped mark as read and deleted it without flinching. Let them help themselves. By 8:55, Rachel was perched on the porch swing, mug in hand, already in her don't try me mood. She wore her senior center volunteer t-shirt like body armor. Her gray curls were pulled into a bun so tight it could cut glass. At 8:59, a white pickup rumbled into the driveway. Kyle Jensen stepped out, toolbox in one hand, a to-go coffee in the other. His shirt read, "Locks don't lie," and Eleanor liked him instantly for that alone. "Good morning, Ms. Parsons," he said brightly. "Ready to start fresh?" "I am," she said, standing straighter than she had in weeks. Kyle tipped his head toward Rachel. "You must be the watchdog." "Damn right," Rachel replied. Kyle grinned and got to work. He moved with confident efficiency, removing the deadbolt, checking the alignment, measuring twice, replacing screws. Rachel chatted aimlessly while Eleanor stood quietly by the screen door, hands folded like she was preparing for a funeral. "Doesn't take long," Kyle said, sliding the new lock into place. "They make these smarter and sturdier every year. Reinforced steel core. Can't bump it. Can't pick it. And—" He held up a sleek, matte-finished key like it was a badge of honor. "Nobody copies this without your permission. Period." He handed her 3 copies. They felt heavier than expected, substantial, like truth in metal form. Eleanor ran her thumb along the grooves of one. "It's beautiful." Kyle chuckled. "That's not usually the reaction I get, but I'll take it." Rachel leaned forward. "How hard would it be to make a fake key that looks like the old one?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Fake?" "Yeah, a decoy," Rachel said. "Give it to her son next time he asks. Let him feel smart when he tries it. Then watch him stew when it doesn't work." Eleanor snorted before she could help it. The laugh came out low and sudden, surprising all 3 of them. Kyle grinned. "Petty with a purpose. I like it. I can grind down a blank, no problem. Won't open a thing." "Make 2," Rachel said. "Let's get theatrical." Eleanor turned toward her friend, one brow raised. "Since when are you the villain in this story?" Rachel lifted her mug. "Since you stopped being the victim." Kyle finished tightening the last plate, tested the mechanism, and turned back toward Eleanor. "You're locked down, solid as they come. If anyone tries something, it won't be subtle." Eleanor nodded, the keys heavy in her palm. "Thank you, Kyle." "Really?" "No problem at all," he said, picking up his toolbox. "I like helping people take back their doors." Rachel watched him go, then turned to Eleanor with a look that wasn't quite a smile. "Well?" she asked. Eleanor took the key and slid it into the front door. It turned with a satisfying click. The bolt locked, smooth and sure. For the first time in years, that sound meant something new. Not keeping someone out, but letting herself in. Rachel clinked her mug against the storm door. "That's the sound of boundaries, sweetheart." Eleanor nodded slowly. "It's the sound of mine." Her phone buzzed again. One new voicemail. "David." She didn't check it. She turned the ringer off entirely and slipped the phone into the drawer with the coupons and old keys, buried it beneath them like a time capsule she had no intention of digging up. But as she reached for the drawer to close it, her hand froze. There, tucked in the very back, was something she hadn't seen in years. A spare key hidden in a magnetic box. The kind people used under doormats and flower pots. She picked it up slowly. Had she forgotten it was there, or had he put it back? The new lock made no sound when it turned. Eleanor twisted the key once, then twice, testing the deadbolt like a captain checking a ship's anchor. It held firm. The house was sealed. The door, at last, hers. She drew the curtains partway shut, not all the way, and left the lights off just as Rachel had advised. "Let him guess whether you're home," she'd said. "Uncertainty is a mirror. Let him look into it." Now they sat together in the kitchen, mugs of chamomile steeping between them, steam curling like ghosts into the stale afternoon air. Outside, cicadas screamed in waves. The only other sound was the ticking of the stove clock. Then came tires on gravel. David's SUV. Eleanor's hand didn't tremble this time. She lifted her mug, blew on it once, and took a calm sip. Rachel didn't look up. Showtime. The car door slammed. A pause. Then, rattle, rattle, rattle. The doorknob twisted violently, once, twice. Then the sound of a full-body shove against the panel. "Mom?" David's voice rang through the door, loud and sharp. "What the hell?" Eleanor didn't answer. Rachel took another sip of tea. The knob shook harder, the metal clinking against the reinforced frame. "Are you serious right now?" Another slam, shoulder to wood. It echoed through the quiet of the house, but the door didn't budge. The new lock held, silent and sure. "I know you're in there." Still, Eleanor said nothing. She watched from the kitchen table, the front hallway visible in her periphery. Her body stayed still, her eyes calm. But inside, her pulse thudded like a war drum. Not fear, not even anger, just something ancient and waking. Bang, bang, bang. "Open the damn door, Mom." Rachel exhaled. "He's a toddler with a mortgage." Eleanor didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Another slam. Then a long pause. "You're being ridiculous," David shouted, his voice turning raw. "You're not thinking clearly," Sharon said. He stopped, huffed. "You don't treat family like this." Still nothing from Eleanor. Not a word. Rachel glanced over. "You okay?" Eleanor nodded. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm exactly okay." David kicked the door once, not hard, but enough to send a thump through the baseboard. And then came the final twist, that tone of weaponized concern he'd mastered since he was a teenager, low, manipulative, aimed to wound. "You're making it impossible to care about you know that?" Rachel's jaw flexed. "He's trying every page in the book, huh?" Eleanor kept her eyes on the curtain. "And every one of them's overdue." Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the ruckus stopped. They heard retreating footsteps, the crunch of gravel underfoot. The driver's side door slammed again. The engine turned over. He didn't peel out. David never made that kind of exit. But the sound of him backing out was clipped, irritated, like the car itself had caught his mood. Rachel gave a low whistle. "Well, damn!" Eleanor stood and walked to the door. She didn't open it, just stood there for a moment, hand resting lightly on the knob. She didn't feel scared. She felt unshackled. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Rachel picked it up, turned the screen to show her. Voicemail from David. Eleanor didn't even glance. "Delete it," she said. Rachel did. Outside, the street returned to its usual silence. Not peaceful, but changed, like the air had shifted just slightly in Eleanor's favor. Rachel leaned against the counter. "You know this isn't the last tantrum." Eleanor gave a small nod. "Number. But it's the first one he has to have outside the door." She looked down at the set of new keys on the hook. The brass gleamed in the last edge of afternoon light. Then her gaze drifted to the drawer across the room. The one with the hidden magnetic key she'd found the night before, still resting in her palm then, still carrying a question. Had she left it there? Or had David returned it, after using it? Her stomach turned, not with fear, but calculation. She walked to the drawer, opened it, and took out the magnetic box. Then opened it. Empty. The folder on Eleanor's lap was thick, too thick for a woman who never kept clutter. But each page inside it had been selected for one reason only. Proof. Grocery receipts with her handwriting. Voicemails transcribed word for word. The screen-captured Facebook rant from David's public profile where he called her erratic. She'd printed it in 14-point Times New Roman, double-spaced, like it was going on exhibit. She sat on the leather sofa in Martin Blake's law office, her back perfectly straight, heels flat against the floor. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. Beyond the closed door, she could hear the rhythmic whir of the printer and Martin's voice on a call, always even, always measured. Just like him. Rachel sat beside her, quietly reading a magazine upside down. "I've got a good feeling," she murmured. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need feelings today. She needed ink. The office door opened with a gentle click. Martin leaned into the waiting room, his crisp white shirt as perfectly pressed as his words. "Eleanor, Rachel, come on in." Eleanor stood, the folder clutched under one arm like a sacred document. She walked past the rows of law books and into the familiar office, mahogany desk, 2 chairs, a tray of polished pens lined up like soldiers. A photo of Martin and his wife at Lake Okoboji still sat in its usual corner, slightly crooked. Martin gestured for her to sit. "You brought notes?" "I brought history," Eleanor said, setting the folder on the desk with finality. Martin opened it and began flipping through. He made no noises of surprise, just the occasional nod, the kind attorneys save for when they're stacking bricks for someone's legal fortress. "This is thorough," he said. "Meticulous, actually." "She's had a lot of practice," Rachel chimed from her chair. Martin glanced up. "You want to tell me what changed?" Eleanor folded her hands on the table. He stopped knocking, and he started assuming. Martin nodded again, slower this time. "Have you had this conversation with him directly?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "I tried. He ignored it, or twisted it, or turned it into a bill I somehow owed him." "And Sharon?" "Sharon lives in the background, but she claps when he performs." Martin tapped the folder with one knuckle. "Then let's make this official." He pulled a form from his drawer, a lean clinical document already half-filled with Eleanor's prior details. He laid it in front of her with a steady hand. "I'm preparing an amendment to your existing will. This revokes any inheritance for David Parsons and Sharon Parsons effective immediately." He slid a second page forward. "And this allocates your estate, house, accounts, personal effects, to your named beneficiaries." "Which are?" Eleanor asked, even though she already knew. Martin smiled faintly. "Rachel Miller. And, per your prior note, the Des Moines Community Food Pantry." Rachel stiffened. "Wait, me?" Eleanor turned toward her. "Yes, you, because you bring lemonade and truth, and you knock before walking in." Rachel blinked fast once. "Damn it, Elle." Martin pulled a pen from the tray, clicked it with a quiet snap, and held it out. Eleanor took it. She didn't hesitate. The line was smooth, her signature clean. No tremor, no second guessing. Martin notarized it in silence. When it was done, Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Something inside her, some long dormant burden, shifted, not completely lifted, but repositioned, moved from her chest to somewhere behind her. Still there, but no longer in the way. Martin slid a sealed copy into a heavy envelope and tucked the original into a separate file. "This goes into the vault today," he said. "The revised version will be on file with the county by Friday." Rachel let out a slow breath. "Well, that's one hell of a Thursday." Eleanor stood. She felt taller than she had that morning. Straight, like the years had realigned, even if her spine hadn't. As Martin opened the door for them, Eleanor turned back. "I want one more thing added," she said. Martin raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "A letter. Personal. To be delivered to David only after I'm gone." Martin hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Rachel looked over. "What do you want it to say?" Eleanor didn't answer. Not yet. But in her mind, the words were already written, not to explain, not to apologize, but to leave a legacy of truth, one that could no longer be silenced, spun, or ignored. The decoy will was printed on thick ivory paper, just like the real one. Same font, same margins, same gold notary seal pressed perfectly at the bottom. Only difference? It left everything to David and Sharon. Eleanor folded it slowly, creasing it with the precision of someone packing away a lie she never planned to revisit. She didn't feel clever. She felt strategic. Her hallway closet creaked open, the air inside tinged with cedar and old perfume. The safe sat low on the floor beneath a box of Christmas lights and a quilt she hadn't unfolded in years. She bent, entered the code, David's old high school graduation date, which he'd never think she still remembered, and heard the quiet clunk of it unlocking. Inside was a tangle of sensible folders, tax returns, birth certificates, insurance documents. She slipped the decoy will into a blank envelope marked estate planning and tucked it beneath the last year's file for property tax. Not too hidden, not too obvious. Let them find it. Let them think it was easy. From behind her, Rachel's voice echoed down the hall. "Elle? In here," Eleanor called. Rachel appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs. "You want tea or bourbon disguised as tea?" Eleanor took the one on the left without asking. "I trust your labeling system." Rachel leaned against the doorframe, watching her rise from the floor. "So? You feel better now that the bait's been planted?" Eleanor gave a small nod, walking past her toward the kitchen. "I feel like I stopped waiting for someone else to solve it." They sat at the kitchen table again. How many plans had begun at that chipped wood surface? And Eleanor sipped her mug slowly, eyes tracking the steam as it curled and vanished. Rachel reached for her phone and tapped out a quick text. "To Kyle," she explained. "Told him he should swing by for a quick once-over on the locks." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Think I'm in danger?" "No," Rachel said. "But I think your peace of mind is worth a few screws and a set of fresh eyes." 15 minutes later, Kyle arrived, wearing the same easy grin and tool belt that had made him look like a walking guarantee. He did a circuit around the doors and windows, tested the back slider, double-checked the screws on the front deadbolt. "All clear," he said finally. "No signs of tampering, locks are clean. You're secure, Ms. Parsons." Eleanor nodded, gratitude quiet and steady in her chest. "Thanks, Kyle." He gave her a little salute and disappeared down the porch steps like a soldier dismissed. Rachel watched him leave, then leaned her elbows on the table. "You ever think about how quickly everything started shifting once you stopped asking?" "Stopped asking what?" "For permission." Eleanor didn't answer. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't rush to check it. Eventually, she stood and tapped the screen. One new voicemail. Sharon. Rachel looked up. "What's the chorus this time?" Eleanor clicked the speaker and let it play. Sharon's voice came through, syrupy and clipped at once. "Hi, Eleanor. We really hope you're okay. David said you've been distant, and we're just trying to keep the family from falling apart. I mean, you raised him. You know how stubborn he can be. We're not asking for much, just some acknowledgement, some gratitude maybe, after all we've done." The message ended with a cheery little, "Love to you." Rachel whistled. Textbook passive-aggressive sermon. Eleanor didn't respond. She walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a notebook. In it, she jotted down the time, the date, and the quote, just some acknowledgement, some gratitude. She flipped the page, began a new entry beneath the heading, Behavior Timeline. Rachel poured more tea. "You documenting or declaring war?" Eleanor capped the pen. "Why not both?" Outside, dusk rolled in across the yard like velvet pulled over a table. Streetlights blinked awake, casting slow golden pools across the sidewalk. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked and a screen door slammed. Normal things. Harmless. Then the porch light flickered. Rachel glanced up. "Motion sensor?" "Set to high sensitivity," Eleanor said. They waited. The porch light flickered again. This time it stayed on. Rachel's voice dropped. "You expecting anyone?" Eleanor shook her head. She stood, walked slowly to the living room, and peered through the side window's curtain. Nothing. No one. But as she turned back toward the hallway, she caught it. A faint, muddy shoe print on the outer edge of the porch steps. Rachel's phone buzzed twice on the kitchen table. She glanced down, snorted, and turned the screen toward Eleanor. "Well, would you look at that? Your boy's having a Facebook tantrum?" Eleanor didn't move. Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Want me to read it or let it rot?" Eleanor reached slowly for her reading glasses. "Let's see the rot." Rachel tapped the screen. David's face hovered in the profile picture, smiling, tie crooked, his arm looped around Sharon's shoulders at some vacation spot Eleanor had never been invited to. The post was public. Of course it was. When your own mother turns on you after everything you've done for her, esmaj. Some people just get old and bitter. But sure, go ahead and worship the neighbor who manipulates the whole situation. Some of us still have jobs, responsibilities, lives, but we're the bad guys for not babysitting full-time? Unreal. A comment had already appeared beneath it. "Wait, what happened?" You okay? David had liked it. Eleanor stared at the post for a long moment, her thumb resting lightly on the table. Screenshot it, she said. Rachel nodded, tapped twice and forwarded it to her. Adding to the timeline? Front and center. The post wasn't about truth, it wasn't even about her. It was theater, performed just loudly enough to gather digital sympathy. But Eleanor had learned something new over the past few weeks. Screenshots don't forget. She printed it that evening. Same format as the others, 14-point Times New Roman, double-spaced. She slipped it into her binder behind Sharon's voicemail transcript. The title tab read, in neat block letters, Documented Behavior, Parsons Household. The next morning, Eleanor took the binder with her to Martin's office. He scanned the page without speaking, then gave a low whistle. Well, subtlety isn't a family trait, is it? Eleanor smiled without warmth. Number but patterns are. Martin leaned back in his chair. You keep this up and we could teach a course. Digital Defamation 101. Just keeping a record, she said. He wants witnesses? He'll have them. On her way out, Rachel nudged her. You really need to check the comments later. He's digging his own grave in the replies. I don't need to watch the shovel, Eleanor said. That afternoon at the senior center, things felt different. Not cold, not hostile, just tilted. People still smiled when she walked by, but a few of those smiles were too quick, too careful. Eleanor heard her name in a hallway whisper, saw a pair of younger volunteers glancing at a phone before glancing at her. She walked into the craft room with her chin high and her cardigan buttoned to the top. Her knitting group was already seated, skeins of yarn like spilled paint between them. Cynthia, the retired librarian, looked up. Elle, you saw it, right? Eleanor sat slowly. Saw what? The post, David's little martyr moment. I don't read nonsense before lunch. A few of the women laughed, quiet, surprised. Cynthia leaned in. You okay? Eleanor threaded her yarn through the needles. Never better. No one asked again. And as she left the building that afternoon, something happened that hadn't happened in years. The receptionist at the front desk smiled at her, not politely, not out of habit, but proudly, as if Eleanor had done something rare in their world, drawn a line in sand and said, not this time. Rachel was waiting in the car with 2 iced teas and a smirk. Half the center wants you to teach a class on holding boundaries. Eleanor took the tea and sipped it slowly. I'd rather show them how. They drove home in a comfortable quiet. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light blinked on again, just once, and then stayed off. No prints this time, no motion, just dusk folding in like a well-worn coat. Inside, Eleanor hung her purse, set the binder on the kitchen table, and went to put the kettle on. Then she noticed something. The drawer with the coupons, where she'd buried her phone under the old spare keys, was slightly ajar. Not open, just not shut. She hadn't touched it that day. She hadn't left it that way. The knock was too polite to be honest. 3 gentle taps on the screen door, like an apology trying to dress itself as manners. Eleanor looked up from the kitchen table, her hands still wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee. She didn't need to peek through the window to know who it was. Sharon. Rachel, already stationed on the porch swing with her phone, gave a theatrical sigh and tilted her sunglasses down. Should I go full courtroom footage, or just background ambiance? Eleanor didn't answer. She simply stood, walked to the door, and unlocked it. Just the screen door, not the deadbolt. Eleanor, Sharon said brightly, too brightly. Her makeup was flawless, her pastel sweater too cheerful for the humidity. She looked like she was about to hand out church flyers or ask for a PTA donation. I thought I'd stop by, Sharon continued, glancing around. Just the 2 of us. Thought maybe we could talk. Start fresh. Eleanor opened the screen door without inviting her in. Talk about what? Oh, you know. Sharon stepped forward, but stopped short when the main door remained closed. David's upset, obviously, but we both know things got out of hand. No one meant for all this mess. We just want to make things right. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't blink. Sharon smiled tighter. Family doesn't always see eye to eye, but that doesn't mean we throw each other out. We're here. We've always been here. Rachel shifted slightly on the swing. Her phone was angled just so screen glowing. Recording. Her iced tea clinked as she took a leisurely sip. Eleanor folded her arms. "Who's we?" Sharon hesitated. "Too long. David and I, we think there's still time to fix this." "Fix what?" "Well," Sharon let out a soft, exasperated chuckle. "The distance, the coldness. Look, I know David said some things, we all have. But the Locks, the lawyer, Eleanor, that's not how families handle disagreements. That's how you treat strangers." Eleanor studied her for a long, silent moment. Sharon shifted her weight. "Don't you think it's time to let some of this go?" Rachel coughed behind her hand. "Oh, this is good," she murmured, just loud enough for her phone to pick it up. Sharon flinched at the sound. Eleanor finally spoke. "You came here to rewrite the story." Sharon blinked. "What?" "You're not apologizing. You're editing." The brightness drained from Sharon's face like a light switch flicked off. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." Sharon's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be the bigger person here, Eleanor. You've shut us out and we're still showing up." "Why?" "Because we care." Eleanor didn't react. "Number. Because you want the narrative back." Rachel's mouth twitched into a grin behind her sunglasses. "I came here in good faith," Sharon said, her voice rising now, crisp around the edges. "You're not the only one hurting." Eleanor tilted her head. "Then maybe you should go home and heal." The silence after that was thunderous. Sharon stared at her, really stared. And for the first time, the smile was gone. No sweetness, no soft tone. Just the sharp corners of entitlement left behind. She turned without another word and walked down the steps. Her heels clacked against the concrete like a threat that hadn't found its teeth. At the base of the porch, she looked back once, eyes scanning Eleanor's face like she was searching for weakness. Eleanor simply closed the screen door and locked it. The main door followed with a solid, final click. Rachel stood from the swing. $10 says that video goes viral on the local gossip circuit." Eleanor walked back to the kitchen, her steps even. Her coffee was cold now, but she drank it anyway. Later that afternoon, a truck pulled up to the curb, Kyle's. He stepped out with a reinforced deadbolt in one hand and a flat box under the other. "Thought I'd bring you something extra," he said, holding up the box. "Reinforced strike plate, heavy duty. Saw her car in the neighborhood yesterday, figured a little overkill wouldn't hurt." Rachel gave him a nod of approval. "That's our locksmith/guardian angel." Kyle installed the hardware in 20 minutes flat. When he was done, he handed Eleanor the new set of keys. "This lock?" he said. "Not even a battering ram could get through." Eleanor held the key for a beat. "Good." Kyle paused, his gaze lingering. "Everything okay?" "No," she said, "but it will be." He tipped his cap and left. Eleanor slipped the new key onto her ring. It was heavier than the others. Unmistakably new. She walked through the house slowly, checking the back door, the side latch, the windows. Every lock clicked clean. Every door answered to her. But when she reached the hallway, she froze. The safe. It was open. Just a crack, but open. The safe hadn't been forced open. That was the most unsettling part. No scratches. No scuffs. The lock mechanism still clicked properly when she closed it again, though Eleanor could feel the shift, the wrongness, settling into her bones. She didn't say anything that night. Not to Rachel. Not even in her own notes. She just went to sleep with one eye on the hallway and her keys under the pillow. The next morning, she was at Martin Blake's office by 8:30 a.m. sharp, a sealed manila envelope in hand. "This version," she said, placing it gently on his desk, "is the only one that matters." Martin scanned the document, flipping through it once, slowly. "Same beneficiaries?" "Yes," Eleanor said, "but I've added 2 things. A direct donation to the Des Moines Community Food Pantry and title transfer of my home to Rachel Miller." Martin blinked. "Immediately?" "Upon my death," she said. "But I want it clear, undeniable." He nodded and pulled a fresh form from his drawer. "We'll file this version with the county," he said, "under seal. Official copy stored in my firm's vault. I want to sign it today." "You've already signed the interim version." "This one's different. Rachel, seated across from her in a denim jacket and too much mascara for a morning meeting, nodded solemnly. This is the locked and loaded version. Eleanor passed her the pen. You'll serve as witness again? Rachel didn't hesitate. Gladly. The signatures were clean, steady, final. When Martin notarized the last page, he gave Eleanor a long, thoughtful look. You sure you want to go this far? Eleanor nodded once. They went further. He placed the signed will into a separate envelope, marked it in red ink, and slid it into a locked drawer behind his desk. The one in your safe, he said quietly, will buy you time. But this one buys you truth. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. By noon, she and Rachel were back at the house. The binder sat on the kitchen table, open to a page labeled Final Asset List. Eleanor added 2 entries in neat handwriting. House, 1426 Mill Creek Drive. Beneficiary, Rachel Miller. Donation, $50,000 to Des Moines Community Food Pantry. Rachel peered over her shoulder. You're gonna feed half the city. Eleanor capped the pen. Good. Let the money do something decent for once. They were still sitting at the table, quiet, content, when it started. First a sharp knock. Then the sound of a key entering the front door lock. Click. Then a pause. Another turn. Harder this time. Eleanor rose slowly. Rachel followed behind her. From the front hallway they could hear it. The unmistakable scrape of metal fighting a lock that no longer answered to the hand that held it. Are you kidding me? Rachel hissed. Then came the voice. Mom! David, loud, rigid with disbelief. Why the hell isn't this working? Eleanor didn't speak. She stood just inside the living room, out of sight, arms folded. David rattled the knob again, slammed the doorframe. Are you seriously locking me out of my own childhood home? Rachel's eyes flared. Oh, here we go? They waited. 3 seconds later, the real twist arrived. A ringtone. Then, yeah, hi. I need to report something. My mother's inside. She changed the locks and isn't answering. I think she might be confused. Maybe at risk. Eleanor's breath caught. He was calling the police. Rachel mouthed. Are you freaking kidding me? Eleanor walked calmly to the dining room window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see him pacing on the porch, phone pressed to his ear like a lifeline. No panic in his voice, no real concern. Just strategy. He was building his own paper trail. Eleanor walked back to the hallway and reached for her keys. Behind her, Rachel said, You want me to go out there first? Eleanor shook her head. No, she said softly. I want him to see the person who changed the locks. She unlocked the door, not to let him in, but to open it just wide enough. David turned sharply, phone still in hand. He looked surprised, only for a second, then furious. I had no choice, he started, gesturing toward the phone. You're not answering, you're not thinking straight. You don't live here, Eleanor said calmly. That doesn't mean I call the cops on my mother, he snapped. She looked him straight in the eyes. You're right, that would require respect. Behind her, Rachel clicked, record. The squad car rolled up slower than David expected. Not with sirens, not with urgency. Just 2 uniformed officers stepping out like they were arriving for a noise complaint they'd already decided was nothing. One, a tall woman with mirrored sunglasses. The other, mid-50s, mustached, looking unimpressed before anyone spoke. David straightened on the porch like he'd been waiting to deliver a monologue. Officers, thanks for coming. It's my mom, Eleanor Parsons. She changed the locks. Won't answer. I think she might be in distress. Mental or medical, I'm not sure. The woman officer tilted her head. But she opened the door to you. Well, yeah, David said, flustered. Briefly, she wouldn't let me in. The male officer glanced toward the house. Is she in there now? David nodded. Yes, with someone else. A neighbor, I think. At that, the front door opened again. Eleanor stood in the threshold, one hand resting gently on the frame. Rachel stood just behind her, arms crossed, phone still out, camera still rolling. Afternoon, officers, Eleanor said clearly. Would you like to come in? David took a step forward. Just them, she added. David froze. The officers exchanged a look, then walked up the steps and followed her inside. Rachel didn't budge. She stood guard in the doorway like a living reminder that witnesses mattered. Inside, Eleanor moved calmly, purposefully. She led the officers to the kitchen table and slid a folder across the surface. "This is the deed to my home," she said. "Title's in my name. I also have my attorney's notarized notice that the locks were changed legally. If you'd like, I can call him." The female officer opened the folder. The male one leaned over her shoulder. They didn't say much. Eleanor let the silence do the talking. After a beat, the male officer cleared his throat. "Ms. Parsons, is there any reason you would want your son here today?" "No," she said evenly. "He doesn't live here. He hasn't for over 20 years. "And the locks were changed?" "By a licensed locksmith. Receipts in that envelope." The officers glanced through the papers again. Everything was in order. Crisp, filed, beyond reproach. They stepped back toward the front door. Rachel moved aside. David tried again. "She's not well, okay? She's cutting people out. She's standing right there," the female officer cut in. Coherent, calm, legally sound. David's mouth opened, then shut. "You're welcome to call Adult Protective Services," the male officer added, "but based on what we've seen, there's no cause for wellness intervention, and no right of access here unless she gives it." "She's my mother." "She's also a homeowner," the woman said, "and she's not required to open her door to anyone, including family." Rachel let out the faintest laugh. David turned on her. "Is this funny to you?" Rachel smiled like a knife unsheathing. "No, David, it's beautiful." "Sir," the officer warned, "we're going to ask you to leave the property now." David looked between them, at the porch, at the doorway, at the phone in Rachel's hand, still clearly recording. "I'm not trespassing," he snapped. "You are," the male officer said, "as of the moment she asked you not to be here." Eleanor hadn't spoken in several minutes. Now she did. She stepped forward, eyes steady. "Please leave, David." His nostrils flared. His mouth worked silently, searching for something persuasive, something threatening, but nothing came. Because there was nothing left to use. He turned and stomped down the steps, muttering something Eleanor didn't bother to catch. The officers followed him out, their tone clipped and civil. He threw one last glance over his shoulder as he reached the SUV. Eleanor didn't blink. Rachel closed the door behind the officers with a slow, deliberate hand, then leaned back against it and whistled low. "Well?" she said. "If that's not the sound of a house reclaiming itself." Eleanor walked back to the kitchen table. She picked up the folder, flipped it shut, set it down beside the binder labeled Documented Behavior, Parsons Household. Then, finally, she exhaled, not relief, validation. She sat, letting the quiet settle around her like a coat that finally fit. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Sharon. "What did you say to him? He's spiraling." Rachel saw the screen and chuckled. Eleanor didn't reply. She just tapped the message, pressed screenshot, and added it to the archive. But outside, just beyond the porch, the security camera blinked red, recording, and in the playback the last frame would show David's SUV idling at the curb for 4 more minutes. Engine running, lights off. The envelope was tucked behind the screen door, weighed down by a smooth riverstone like some sad attempt at symbolism. Eleanor spotted it on her morning lap around the garden. Sun hat on, gloves dusted in soil, clippers in one hand, pruning the overgrown lilacs with gentle precision. Her roses were finally coming back after the heat wave. She wasn't about to let a note from Sharon sour their bloom. She knelt, picked it up, and turned it over. No name on the front, just her address, scribbled hastily in a familiar looped cursive. Inside, she knew before opening it, would be the same tired melody. Some call to peace written in passive voice, a soft-edged threat disguised as concern. She walked into the kitchen and slid the envelope into the shredder without opening it. The teeth whirred for 3 seconds. The paper didn't put up a fight. Rachel, seated at the table in sweats and slippers, raised her coffee in salute. "Best confetti I've seen in years." Eleanor gave a quiet nod, walked to the sink and rinsed her gloves. She didn't feel triumphant, just lighter, less inclined to carry a weight she hadn't asked for. A few minutes later, the landline rang. She let it go to voicemail. Then she checked the message. Martin's voice was calm as ever. Hey, Eleanor. Just checking in. Don't respond to anything else from them. Note, call, voicemail. Let your binder and your lawyer do the work. You're not in a conversation anymore. You're in a position. And they're learning that. Eleanor deleted the message after listening. Not because it wasn't valuable, but because it had already done its job. By late afternoon, she was back in the garden, barefoot this time, letting the cool grass remind her that the world could be kind to those who stopped apologizing for needing quiet. She knelt in the soft soil, nudging tiny clumps of fertilizer into the base of her lavender bushes. The wind had finally turned, cooler, cleaner. From the front yard, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. She stood slowly and turned. Kyle Jensen waved from his truck, a flat box under one arm and his usual easy grin on his face. "Back door held," he called, "but I thought I'd bring something for insurance." Eleanor met him at the porch steps, brushing dirt from her palms. "What is it this time? A vault door?" He chuckled. "Close. Steel bolt upgrade. Can't be kicked in, not without a battering ram and 2 hours of bad luck." He held it up like a prize. "Want me to install it?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Why not? Apparently I'm collecting locks like some women collect teacups." Rachel stepped out onto the porch, a pair of popsicles in hand. "Hey, Kyle," she said. "Want cherry or grape for your trouble?" He blinked. "Are you offering bribes now?" "Bribes? Number this is payment in snacks. Totally legal." They all laughed, and for a moment, it felt less like defense and more like maintenance, just a life being lived, repairs made, measures taken. While Kyle worked, Eleanor returned to her yard, pruning clippings into neat piles, her shears slicing through the silence like punctuation. When the new bolt clicked into place, she didn't test it. She just nodded. "Thank you, Kyle." He tipped his cap. "Always happy to help the most secure house on Mill Creek Drive." After he left, Rachel lingered at the edge of the porch. "You realize," she said, "between the document binder, the locked vault, and the fortress-level entry points, you're basically untouchable." "Good," Eleanor said. "Let them try anyway." But as she turned to go inside, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message, blocked number, no caller ID. The preview showed a single sentence, "You think you've won something." She stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't open it. She didn't delete it. She didn't need to. Instead, she slid the phone back into her pocket, turned toward the garden again, and began pulling weeds, one by one. Behind her, the sprinkler hissed to life. Inside, the bolt clicked shut again. The post dropped at 2:17 a.m. Rachel found it first, she always did, and sent the screenshot before Eleanor was even out of bed. David Parsons posted, "Funny how some people think boundaries mean locking out your own family. No calls, no visits, no dignity, just lawyers and paper trails. Some folks are rewriting their lives for attention, not truth. But the people who matter? We know better." Below it, a cascade of comments, half sympathetic, half confused, all performative. Rachel added no message with the screenshot. She didn't have to. Eleanor opened her binder to the now familiar tab, Digital Behavior, Evidence Log, and printed the new rant on clean white paper. It joined the others in neat plastic sleeves, preserved like fossils of weaponized self-pity. She slipped it in without emotion, without comment, without fear. That afternoon, she and Rachel drove into town, not for errands, not for strategy, just coffee. They parked outside Lindy's Diner, the kind of place where the mugs were chipped but the gossip was polished. The air inside smelled like cinnamon, grease, and something warmly artificial. Comfort, maybe. As they sat in their usual booth near the window, heads turned. Not all at once. Not all, obviously, but enough. A woman Eleanor vaguely recognized from the senior center nodded to her with something that looked like quiet respect. A teenager behind the counter offered them free refills without being asked. Even the waitress, Dina, 40-something, tired eyes, quick smile, lingered longer than usual after taking their order. "Hell of a week, huh?" she said, setting down the coffee. Eleanor met her gaze evenly. "Only if you let it be." Dina chuckled and walked away, muttering something that might have been badass. Rachel stirred her coffee slowly. "They're watching you now, you know." "I know. They're picking sides." Eleanor sipped. Let them. They sat in silence for a while, the low hum of small-town life flickering around them, forks clinking, a baby fussing in the corner, the rustle of newspapers and whispered judgment. Eleanor didn't flinch. When they returned home, Rachel headed back to her place across the street. "Power nap before bridge night," she announced, and Eleanor unlocked the front door to her own fortress. The bolt turned smoothly, just like Kyle promised. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. She left the binder on the entryway table and walked toward the kitchen to make herself a cup of lemon tea. The kettle had just begun to steam when her phone buzzed again. New message, Sharon Parsons. She didn't check it immediately. She didn't need to. She finished her tea prep first, squeezed half a lemon, added honey, stirred slowly. Then she picked up the phone, leaned against the counter, and read the screen. "Eleanor, please. He's unraveling. I don't know what to do. You're making this worse. Just talk to him. Talk to me. Don't let it end like this." Eleanor stared at the words for a long time. She imagined Sharon sitting in her car, typing that with one hand, watching the house from a distance. She imagined her pacing the living room while David ranted, or maybe just sending it quietly from the bathroom. Some private cry that didn't quite qualify as brave. She didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out her notebook from the drawer, flipped to the timeline, and wrote, 2:42 p.m. Sharon text, "Don't let it end like this." She underlined the word "end" twice. Then she placed her phone face down and walked to the back porch. The breeze had returned, crisp and promising. The kind that whispered autumn even though August still held its grip. She sat in the rocker, eyes scanning the quiet neighborhood. Across the street, Rachel's porch light flicked on. Inside the house, the motion sensor on the hallway camera chimed once. No movement outside, no breeze inside, just that soft, mechanical alert. She stood slowly, entered the house. Nothing looked disturbed, but her gut, honed from 73 years of survival and silence, told her something was different. She walked into the hall, checked the camera log on the monitor by the front door. The last entry was time-stamped only 3 minutes ago. Playback showed a shadow crossing the hallway from inside the house. The house was silent, not the uneasy silence of secrets creeping in, but the sacred kind, the kind you earn after choosing peace over performance. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table in her usual chair, the binder open before her. The tab read, "Final Addendum, Personal Statement." The page beneath it was blank, save for her name typed neatly at the top. No lawyers, no language crafted by statute. This one would be in her words. She picked up the pen, steady now, and began, "To my son, David Parsons. This letter is not written in anger. It is written in clarity. You were not cut out of my will because I stopped loving you. You were cut out because you stopped treating me like someone who deserved love in return. I spent years making excuses for your behavior. I tried to see the child in the man, but the man never tried to see the mother in me. You were not entitled to my house. You were invited to visit it. You were not owed my money. You were offered my care. I gave you time, space, and every opportunity to meet me halfway. Instead, you called the police." She paused, looked down at the words, then continued, "So let this be the truth no one can revise. I chose dignity. I chose safety. I chose to leave something behind that can grow, not rot." She signed her name at the bottom, Eleanor M. Parsons, the same way she signed birthday cards and legal forms, like every word had weight. She slipped the page into a plastic sleeve and closed the binder. Later that morning, she and Rachel took it to Martin's office. He read the letter silently, his eyes softening only once, at the line about the police. "This," he said, "will be notarized, filed, and attached to the formal will. There won't be a shred of ambiguity." Eleanor nodded. Rachel didn't say anything until they reached the car. Then she turned and wrapped both arms around her. Not a tight hug, but a full one, proud, final. "You're free now," she whispered. "Really free." They drove back in contented quiet, windows cracked just enough to let the summer start fading. It smelled faintly of cut grass and transition. That afternoon, a knock came, not the kind that rattled, not the kind that crept, just a kind one. At the door stood a woman in a green polo shirt embroidered with a wheat stalk and the letters DMCFP. "Ms. Parsons?" she asked gently. "I'm Olivia, director of the Des Moines Community Food Pantry. I just wanted to say thank you, personally, for your gift. It's going to change lives." Eleanor didn't smile at first, not because she wasn't moved, but because the feeling went too deep for surface gestures. She nodded slowly. "Then it's going where it should." Olivia extended a hand. "You're not just giving us funds, you're giving us protection, breathing room, possibility." Rachel hovered behind her, eyes shining. "Told you. Half the city." When Olivia left, Eleanor stood at the porch edge a while longer. She didn't know Kyle had returned until his truck door clicked shut. "You're gonna be on a postage stamp soon," he teased, walking up the drive. Eleanor laughed softly. "Only if it comes with a key." Kyle reached into his back pocket. "Funny you say that." He pulled out a small box. Inside was a key, but not a working one. A pendant. Brass, engraved, worn in just the right way. On the side, a simple inscription, "Owner forever." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up. "You made this?" "My sister does engraving. I figured, after all the locks, you deserved a symbol for the one no one can touch." She stared at it, thumb brushing over the letters. "I never expected—" Kyle cut in gently. "That's the point. They expected it all. You chose what to give." Rachel, watching from the porch, grinned. "It's official. You're the queen of Mill Creek." Eleanor turned the pendant once more in her hand, then slipped the chain around her neck. It sat over her heart like it had always been meant to be there, and for the first time in her life, she felt it fully. Not safe, not strong, sovereign. But across the street, through a curtain crack in Sharon's window, a pair of eyes watched her. And one finger began typing again, a message not yet sent. But ready, the pendant caught the light at just the right angle, a dull gleam of brass resting above Eleanor's collarbone, as permanent and steady as her pulse beneath it. She wore it like armor, not flashy, not loud, just visible enough to say, "This house is spoken for." Rachel noticed it first, of course. They were standing in the backyard, coffee mugs in hand, watching a squirrel make poor decisions near the hydrangeas. Rachel squinted, leaned forward, and grinned. "Is that what I think it is?" Eleanor touched the pendant lightly, as if reacquainting herself with the weight. "Depends what you think it is." Rachel tilted her head. "A trophy, a declaration, a warning label. Take your pick." Eleanor smiled, not wide, but full. "It's mine, that's all." By midweek, half the block had seen it. She didn't parade it around, but it hung there every time she stepped onto the porch, every time she walked to the mailbox, every time she waved to Cynthia from the garden gate or helped Mrs. O'Leary unload her groceries. And they noticed. Not the pendant exactly, but the posture that came with it. Shoulders lifted, gaze level. Eleanor walked like someone who remembered her name belonged at the top of the deed. Cynthia said, "You look taller lately." Mrs. O'Leary added, "There's a piece in your yard, like the house is breathing again." At bridge night, Rachel mentioned the comments casually. "You've got the neighborhood calling you the Mill Creek General. Someone said they'd follow you into battle." Eleanor sipped her tea. "I'm not going to war." Rachel smirked. But you sure as hell finished one." The next day, Kyle came by without texting first. Eleanor didn't mind. She could hear the confident rumble of his truck before he knocked, just once, polite and familiar. He held up a small, sleek box. "Last surprise," he said. "You trust me?" "I haven't regretted it yet," she replied. He stepped inside, removed his boots, and got to work. While he installed the new smart lock, flush, minimal secure, Rachel supervised from the sofa with a bag of chips, offering the occasional sarcastic advice. "Don't forget to wire it to the orbital lasers," she said. Kyle just grinned and kept working. When he was finished, he handed Eleanor a slim, smooth key fob. "Touch it to unlock. App works too, but this is easier." "No more codes?" she asked. "No more keys at all," he said. "Unless you want backup." Eleanor looked at the small, powerful object in her palm. It barely weighed anything, but it felt like control. "I'll keep the pendant," she said softly. "This one's for the door." Kyle chuckled. Fair trade. After he left, she didn't test the lock immediately. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened every window in the house, just an inch, let the air pass through, cleaning out the last remnants of stale worry. She lit a candle on the kitchen counter, let the scent of bergamot and cedar curl through the space like memory rewritten. Rachel popped by around dusk, holding 2 slices of peach pie from the cafe. I brought tribute, she said, for our house goddess. Eleanor took the plate with a half curtsy. Bless you, my humble subject. They ate in the backyard, surrounded by the slow hum of crickets and the smell of cut grass. The porch light flicked on at just the right time, motion activated, sure, but it almost felt like intuition. This is what it was supposed to be, Rachel said. Not the money, not the property, just this. Eleanor nodded. She didn't speak because nothing needed translation anymore. Her home, once a place of expectation and compromise, now simply belonged to her. Every corner, every creak in the floorboards, every inch of soil in the garden. And now, finally, every lock. Later that night, she closed the final curtain, not for secrecy, just for sleep. She paused in the hallway, looking at the framed photo on the wall, her, young and tired, holding David as a baby. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just whispered, I did my part, and walked on. But across town, inside a darkened apartment, David Parsons stared at his laptop. The file he had just opened was titled Revocation and Reallocation, Contesting Beneficiary Designation in Probate Law. He highlighted a passage, then he opened a new tab and typed Private Investigator Des Moines, Reviews. The safe clicked shut with the soft finality of a decision already made. Eleanor knelt before it, hands calm, eyes clear, the certified copy of her final will now sealed behind steel and silence. No ceremony, no speech, just the quiet acknowledgement of a life reauthored in her own language. She stood slowly, not with effort, but with ease, the kind of ease that only comes when you stop waiting for permission to protect yourself. In the kitchen, Rachel sat at the table in her usual chair, legs crossed, flipping through a local paper she didn't care about reading. I made the good stuff, Eleanor said, her voice a smooth thread through the stillness. Rachel looked up, smiling. French roast or emotional closure? Both, Eleanor said, placing a mug in front of her. She poured her own cup with hands that didn't shake anymore. The steam rose between them, curling and vanishing into the soft light that filtered through the linen curtains. Outside, the street lay quiet. The last of summer's bloom still held strong in the yards, zinnias, snapdragons, and the stubborn marigolds that refused to bow out early. Children's chalk drawings decorated the sidewalks. Rainbows, hopscotch grids, a sun with sunglasses. Eleanor watched a neighbor walk their dog, an older man she didn't know well, but who always tipped his hat. Today, he did it again. Just a quiet gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. She raised her mug slightly in return, then turned her gaze inward. I've been thinking, Rachel said, breaking the silence, about how many years I spent biting my tongue around people who hadn't earned my silence. Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached up and touched the brass pendant at her neck. I used to think love was something you owed, she said softly, like a debt. Rachel leaned back. And now? Now I think love is a door. It only opens if both people knock. Rachel exhaled a laugh that sounded like it had been waiting a while to get out. You always were the poet in the group. Eleanor sipped her coffee, the warmth curling through her chest like a soft fire. A breeze moved through the open window. It smelled faintly of lavender and rain on hot pavement. No cars, no voices, just the hum of a neighborhood finally at rest. Do you miss him? Rachel asked, not unkindly. Eleanor looked down into her mug, thought about the question, not as a test, but as an invitation. I miss what I thought we'd have, she said, but not what we did. Rachel nodded. She didn't push. They sat in the kind of quiet that only exists between people who know when not to speak. Eventually, Rachel stood and walked to the window, her eyes scanning the street like a watchtower. You did it, she said. You outlasted them. Eleanor shook her head. I didn't outlast them. I just outgrew the version of me who thought I had to stay small to stay loved. She rose, moved toward the hallway, then paused. There, on the console table near the front door, sat the small key fob Kyle had installed for the smart lock. Sleek, simple, empowering. She picked it up just to feel it in her hand, then set it back down. She didn't need to carry it right now. She was already home. Rachel grabbed her bag. I'll be across the street if you need anything. Bridge night's over, so I'll probably just be organizing my junk drawer and pretending it's therapy. Eleanor smiled, walked her to the door, and gave her a soft, brief hug. Then she locked the door behind her, not out of fear, but because she could. She returned to the kitchen, sat in her chair, and looked out the window once more. The light had shifted, longer shadows, golden slants on the pavement. The kind of light that only arrives when something's over, but not in a sad way. Eleanor placed her hands on the table. No tremble, no rush, just breathe. She touched the pendant again, her fingers brushing across the words Kyle had chosen. Owner forever. She smiled, not for the neighbors, not for Rachel, for herself. And as the sun dipped below the rooftops, she whispered the final truth of her story. Some doors close with anger, others with new locks and no regrets.